I think there is today more pragmatism, but not the cynicism of the Chinese kind, which is, okay, India is in the middle of a COVID pandemic, let's go and take some of their land. So that was the Chinese style, but I think the Indian style is different.
This week's Rajamandala, you take interesting take. The Ukraine conflict is now about 6 months old, and take off from this article in the Global Times, which is a Chinese publication, practically state-sponsored by a scholar called, I think, Lu Zhongyi, if I'm not, forgive my pronunciation. He assesses India as benefiting from the US-China battle, say, in Asia. And almost, I think the metaphor used is just watching two tigers fight on the mountaintop, and you'll come out on top as a result. Do you think that actually India, partially, Delhi has a tendency to believe that what in politics we say about the old Congress thing, that just there's a sort of inertia now to India's growth and it'll all work out? And that maybe Lou is right in that sense?
No. I think the problem with the Chinese way of thinking, they see themselves as hyper realists, see everything in power terms. But in Delhi, that's not the way Delhi has looked at the world. Whether it's the Congress or the BJP, they don't see the world through the same lens, because I think it's a deeper cultural lens. The fact that Prime Minister Modi, sits with President Xi Jinping, despite the boundary issue, we're not as cynical. As the Chinese statecraft is. And second, I think this idea that India can sit back and enjoy the fun when US and China are slugging it out in the South China Sea, I think is fundamentally mistaken. I think today, in a globalized world, any fight between the major powers affects everyone. It is not just, you can pull out and sit back and watch the fun. Just as we were recovering from the COVID pandemic, we've seen the kind of consequences of the Ukraine war. The oil prices have shot up. Indian economy, once again, is facing headwinds. So I think this is really the problem with Liu Zhongyi's article is they ascribing to India the way they look at the world, which is completely cynical, completely power-oriented. But that's not the way I think we think about the world. And I think for us, Ukraine is bad enough. And so I don't think India is looking forward to a conflict in Taiwan. That will make things a lot worse for Delhi and its economic prospects.
You mentioned you mentioned in passing in the piece, everyone should read the piece. It'll be on the indianexpress.com and possibly in the description wherever you're watching this video. One of the things you mentioned in the piece is that in the longer term, India has to now, you've written this in the past and you hinted it in this piece, that with the Ukraine conflict, that there have to be more and more ways we have to diversify how we depend on people, as well as our relationships with both the great powers as well as middle powers. We've seen in the Middle East, that India and in West Asia, that old shibboleths of how our diplomacy was conducted, say vis-a-vis Palestine, Israel as one of the fault lines. We've moved past that. Do you think a similar effort has been made with other middle powers in Europe and beyond, in Europe, in South America? Do you think that's somewhere we're lacking? As the Ukraine war has shown us that global supply chains are very, very volatile now, and India is deeply affected.
Look, I think, one of the things I argue in the piece, look, in the past, India was very idealistic. For example, when the way we serenaded China, the way we supported China without demanding anything in return, either a boundary settlement or of, accepting China's position in Asia, and insisting that China should be represented in the Security Council, when there was speculation about whether India would be interested in that seat. So I think from that idealist position, today India, I think, is far more realist, because today it's realized, despite its best efforts to befriend China, what China has done to us in Ladakh, which is 30 years of agreements to keep peace on the border, were thrown away, and simply walking in, trying to take new land from India. So I think India has learned some of those lessons. And today what India sees is, it's not that you can trust the intentions of some other power. that what India needs is greater diversity in its partnerships and to strengthen itself. And that means engaging more powers. And that, for example, if you see 10 years ago, we were only doing the BRICS. But today you're also doing the Quad. I mean, you want to do things with Europeans. You're sitting with the French. So I think there is today more pragmatism, but not the cynicism of the Chinese kind, which is, okay, India is in the middle of a COVID pandemic. Let's go and take some of their land. So that was the Chinese style. But I think the Indian style is different. I think today we are far more sensitive to the kind of geopolitical considerations. But at the same time, the core objectives that look, our focus must be to preserve an element of peace around us so that India's economic prosperity and progress can continue. And that's where, if China is not interested in that, the question then becomes the diversification of our partnerships becomes even more important today. And we've seen that in the last 2 to 3 years. Certainly after the Doklam crisis in 2017 and the Ladakh crisis in 2020, India, I think, is now consciously trying to expand its partnerships with both the major powers as well as with the middle powers around the world.
And so one final question, we may have covered some, but you end the piece for today on a tantalizing formulation, which is India's positional play versus its strategic play. That so far, at least in the recent past, it's been jockey position. Would you expand on that a little and say what kind of, say, medium and long-term things, not just, of course, vis-a-vis China, but also vis-a-vis just any future adversaries, or at least, less than friendly countries and relationships that crop up, India should be doing to make itself more resilient strategically?
See, I think on the positional play, and I think there's so much focus on, look, India is sitting one day with the BRICS, another day with the Quad. Is India non-aligned? Is India multi-aligned? Suddenly, Russians are very enthusiastic about giving oil to India at low rates. So a lot of focus on these issues rather than what is India's core problem today. From the perspective of India's security, its economic prospects, the power gap with China, that is, Chinese GDP is 5 times larger than India's. Chinese military modernization has gone faster. Chinese, military spending is 4 times larger than that of India. In the past, the Chinese only ingressed in the Himalayas. Today, what's happening in Sri Lanka and all around us. So therefore, how do you close the power gap with China? So that is the strategic objective. Yeah. How does India prevent another Ladakh type of incident? That is, tomorrow they move troops somewhere, because right now he has the initiative to move anywhere he wants, and we are scrambling to cope with it. So how do we prevent further attacks or further surprises of the kind that China does? And 3, that how does India find a balance of power system? We're not talking about containment. We're not talking about being anti-China, but you need stability and constraint, because China's unilateral ambitions, or the like Russia's revisionism in Europe, where you can change borders unilaterally, China thinks it has the power about Japan, about India, about everybody else in Asia, that it can actually move in and change borders. So I think that's where preventing that is our principal strategic objective. So while the positional play goes on a daily basis, diplomacy is adjusting to oil prices. We're talking to the Russians, you're talking to the Americans, sitting with the Chinese in RIC and BRIC and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But the core objective, that we have a challenge that a powerful state is on our borders, and it has claims on your territory, and it has claims for regional primacy, which are fundamentally in contradiction with India. And I think addressing those issues, and that's where strategy is, while the diplomatic positioning of engaging all sides, that's really sometimes misleading and prevents us from seeing the real problem that India faces today.
Right. Thanks so much. Everyone, please join us again next week. Read the article. It is on the indianexpress.com. We'll see you soon, sir. Thank you so much.